Welcome everyone to Ladder Daily Digest. We honor creators, and today we have with us a podcaster, Kendall. Welcome to the show, Kendall.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk more about Kendall's podcast at a later time as he's planning some more subjects that'll be pertinent to people in our arena. And so when he gets everything straight on that, we'll bring him back. But we thought we'd bring him on today to talk about some special topics. Okay. And so, but first, Kendall, let's have like your mini Mormon story.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in the church, lived in the Utah bubble. I was completely Orthodox all the way up through my adult life. I served a mission in Argentina, had lots of high profile callings. When I got divorced, it was the first time in my life where I didn't fit the Mormon mold just perfectly. And that was kind of what started like, this isn't all so great right now. Like, why? But I still kind of put that on my shelf. And then some family drama, caused me to be like, this is not working. And when I finally researched some of the things within my shelf that I had, within minutes, my testimony was broken. And ever since then, I've been just seeking for truth in other sources. And this particular topic I've actually been interested in for about 20 years. I remember even when I was a teenager going over communication books with my family. And this book that is the main focus, How Minds Change by David McRaney, is by far the best treatise on this subject I have ever come across. And I have read dozens of books on this subject. So I think it's going to be really pertinent to Mormons, ex-Mormons, questioning people. It's about how to talk to people once you have these schisms and differences and faith crises and you're on different sides of things. So I'm really excited.
I mean, you've recently been on Mormonish, and did you talk about your story at all in that? Can people learn?
No, I actually like just kind of, here's my brief thing. I really do want to share my full story one day when it's time, but I really would like to keep it about the topics I'm interested for now. And my story is kind of a minor thing to me right now.
Oh, yeah. So where'd you go to school?
BYU and then University of Pennsylvania.
Oh.
UPenn. All right.
Wharton.
I had a lot of Wharton friends. I spent a lot of time there. I actually met John Huntsman while I was there because he's a grad when he was running for president. But no, I was in the teaching school. My master's degree is in teaching.
All righty.
I wanted to say that I relate to, I guess, the fascination with communication and learning more about it. Just as and for me, it started as a teenager. As well because of, I think, family issues. And so that's always been kind of an ongoing thing with me too. And I think also, partly why I got into the peace building program at BYU Hawaii, just as an addition to the major that I was in. It was still like very brand new. And so, but things like that, like I think we probably read very similar books, very well-known books. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? And then there's is it Rational Conversations? And I think there's a companion book to that as well. It's fleeing my mind at the moment. Or How to Have Crucial Conversations. That's what it is. Crucial Conversations.
Yeah. Anyone who's interested and is a Mormon would have read that book.
Yeah.
I read that book as a teenager. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna talk about that today. And I guess kind of talk about how, I guess this is the reason why I think it's so interesting to us as, inside of Mormonism, but maybe even more so out of it, is I think because Mormonism puts so many barriers into place. I think, first of all, it teaches some really unhealthy things about communication, but then also there's just some really unhealthy aspects about the culture that inhibit it. So I think a lot of times it's another one of those things where Mormonism can give lip service to and seems to value, but then the weight of the way the culture is really prevents it from being a true, genuine, honest thing that we can engage
I completely agree. Like they say one thing, but the reality is totally different, but they'll always defend themselves, be like, no, we believe in being kind and family councils. And like, they can go through the list of things, but at the end of the day, it's like, no, like disagreements and divergence is not allowed.
Right.
It makes us uncomfortable. And if you have any of that, the problem is with you, not with us.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Harmony through obedience.
Yep. That's really what it is.
They believe in peace, but it's a very specific peace.
On their terms.
Exactly. Yeah. It's one side only.
So where do you get into this? Was it, I mean, because this has always been kind of an interest, but it really kicked into gear with your deconstruction, or was it also part of your, your like secondary education and stuff?
No, honestly, I've had an interest in it. Like I've done mediation training. I went to the Vital Smarts workshops and, got their trainings for how to be, a better communicator. I've always been interested in this, but it was actually the best stuff that I've come across that will be the focus today. What was kind of random. I just joined Rebecca Biblioteca's book club, and she was like, "Hey, we need a presenter. Someone dropped out for this book, How Minds Change." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know David McCraney had a new book." I followed David McCraney, the You Are Not So Smart podcast, since the beginning. I love all of his books. And I was like, sure, I'll present on this book, even though it's only weeks away. And I read it twice in like 2 weeks and presented for her. And I just, still to this day, it is by far the best treatment of this subject. It is amazing. Like if you watch the Mormonish episode, I go into detail about how our brains literally do not experience reality. It's a meaning-making machine, and we tell ourselves stories, and it's several layers before we actually, in our conscious brain, acknowledge what we are seeing. And the brain has like 6 different things that it does to that information before it goes to your consciousness. Like our brain is not a recorder of memories. It actively changes and adds and removes details depending on various variables. It's fascinating.
So I've put up a presentation that Kendall has, and is this where you wanted to start it?
Yeah. So how to really talk to people when you disagree. Here's some of the books that come from that. There's way more to it. But yeah, and I want to start off with what I'm about to present is not actually what I wish I would be presenting. I wish I was presenting that we're all completely rational all the time. We start with facts. Based on those facts, we form beliefs. Based on those very reasonable, rational, externally verifiable beliefs, we create values, and from those values we get into groups that only want the best for everyone involved. But the reality is it's in reverse. We actually start with our social groups. Almost all of our beliefs and values comes from how we were raised, our where we were born, and the culture, and we actually filter new information through that lens, and we disregard facts. So in light of that reality, just to kind of set expectations, Gene and Maven, like, what would you say, like, what % of the conversation you've had where someone disagrees with you and they have a strong opinion, did you engage with them, disagree with them, and then at the end of that conversation, they walked away saying, "Oh, I was so wrong. I've seen the light. You have thoroughly convinced me there wasn't a shred of value in what I believed a few minutes ago"?
Takes more than a few minutes for me.
I would say never, if we're talking that somebody has a strong opinion at the start of it. I can't think of it ever happening.
That's right.
With me, like on either ends, even things that I ended up believing later, I never believed in the moment that I was hearing them from somebody. I'm especially thinking of like interactions on my mission. So,
and I'll tell you one thing that I was ride sharing with somebody to work, and he mentioned, like, and this is 20 years ago, and he said something about the dark side of the moon, that we'll never see what's on the other side of the moon because it's the dark side of the moon. And I said, well, don't you realize that the moon is, when it's a new moon for us, where we can't see it, the sun is illuminating the other side of the moon. So it's not the dark side, it's just the other side. And he said, he thought about that for a second, and he goes, And then the next day he came back and said, you know what? You were right.
Yeah.
So that took a day.
That's a success story. But one of the wrinkles is again, what I'm about to present is more nuanced as far as like people do not change their minds when three things are present. Emotions are high, opinions differ, and the most important thing where, I'm sorry, your example's still good, but it doesn't quite measure up to what we're going to talk about today, because the third and most important criteria is there are stakes. Like the outcome of if this is true or false, or the opinion itself, like actually matters to them and has consequences in the real world. That's one of the main reasons why people are so insular. They're so entrenched in their opinions. And there's a lot of research on this. I'll just briefly share from Patton Heenan-Stone's book that every conversation you have is really multiple conversations at the same time. It's the topic, the content, it's how you feel about it. And it actually is the third conversation they call the identity conversation. Like whatever we're talking about reflects on me as a person. And if you attack my idea, you're attacking me. Again, if we were perfectly rational, this would not be needed. I even have like a list that I created of like, hey, we're going to talk about this, but we're going to follow these rules. Like we're not going to ever present something unless we say, this is what we're talking about. Do you agree with this premise? And we can't move on to another premise until both people are on the same page.
So what you're saying is if I had bet him $50, it might have took him a week to agree with me. But if I said, if I'm right, you have to think that I'm smarter than you, he would maybe never would agree.
Then it would incentivize him to do what we'll talk about later, to have more reactance, more barriers, more investment in the old belief. And so that's the goal today, is how to lower those walls the most we possibly can and have the best chance for them. Again, I'm sorry to put the expectation here, but people are so entrenched that most of the time your goal should not be anywhere near to change their mind. The best outcome you can hope for is that you've actually let the information into their brain and they actually think about it. If you can get someone to think, that is in 9 times out of 10 the best case scenario.
So you can't convince anybody, they have to convince themselves.
Exactly. That is really rule number 1 of David McRaney's book, is you can do
thanks
nothing.
Everybody for watching. No,
to go back to, I'm thinking about my mission, and this planting seeds is how I used to refer to it. Well, my companion and I would talk about when we had a good interaction with somebody that, obviously it maybe didn't end with them becoming an investigator, but we felt like positive vibes, happened, or maybe we took them from a place of feeling really negatively when they initially opened the door and saw us to, a really positive, productive conversation that we had planted seeds maybe for like the next set of missionaries to come or for some other time in their life. And then in my deconstruction, when a lot of things were coming back to me, a lot of things were coming back from my mission. And I had this kind of funny realization that as I thought I was planting seeds on my mission for other people to eventually accept the gospel, other people, I guess, were planting seeds with me that I didn't realize at the time that would eventually blossom into my being able to leave the church. Because, again, these were ideas. And I mean, it took a decade from the time of my mission to the time that I left. But I do think those seeds were planted back then, and it just took like 10 years to pay off. And
same. I never really had a shelf until my mission. It was the first time I interacted with non-members, was my mission.
Yeah. And I do think that's a healthy way. It's a difficult way to think about conversations. And I'm thinking about street epistemology, actually, which I don't want to get into it too much, but I think if that's something people want to study, I think it's a great way to do exactly what you're saying, which is, if you get skilled at it, you are creating a safe space to be able to for the other person to engage with ideas. And the point of it is not to change their mind at all. And actually one of the hardest skills to learn with street epistemology is when to back off, because sometimes it's at the point that you feel like they're getting something and they're starting like to make progress, that you want to keep going and keep pushing. And often that first breakthrough is the time to actually withdraw and pull back and let them work that out. Yeah. Difficult to do, but
Yeah, don't push them too much. You want them to contemplate. You want them to sit with this thing of like, oh, I hadn't considered that before. Whoa. That is gold. Yeah. And stop right there. Just let them continue. That is gold when you do that.
But I think that's the thing with why street epistemology, it's called street epistemology because it's involved like typically working with strangers, people you don't know. And so I think, back to what the, the three things that you just listed about stakes and about identity, I think, there's a reason why, or I've not seen street epistemology work very well with, high emotions, or high stakes, or just again, like with this identity or with people like in your own family. It's extremely difficult to do street epistemology about something you care about, period, but especially like with people that you know very well. So I guess I did want to put that out there. Those things still like are at play here, and I think they really do prevent even skilled communicators from being able to, meet goals that they can sometimes with strangers.
Absolutely. Okay, so with all that being said, I'm going to give you kind of the things to remember up front. We're going to go over in more detail later, but just if you remember nothing else, people have good reasons to believe whatever it is that you're talking about. I don't care if it's a conspiracy theory. I don't care if you think it's completely against reality. I don't care if you think it's a destructive belief. Remember that whatever that belief or position is, they have a good to them reason for that. And you have to understand and be able to validate that before you engage, or you're going to do more harm than good. This is the hardest one for me, is you can't copy and paste your reasons. Every individual resonates with different values differently, and all the things that are so important to you that lead to a conclusion, they may have no interest in. They may not resonate at all. They may not care one iota for most of those values that you cherish and think that everyone should hold. So that's another thing to keep in mind. The best chance you have in getting someone to change their mind or consider the information is maintaining rapport, safety, and respect. That's where, like, I really want to believe that people care about facts. And if they were wrong, they would immediately be like, oh, I don't want to be wrong. I want to go where the facts. No, like, people already believe that. They don't care about the new information. We go into things being like, oh, I'll take from this anything that I can use to confirm what I already want to believe. And because of that reality, again, going back to the expectations in the beginning, we're not rational creatures. We're rationalizing creatures. If you want to have any chance of getting them to change, you maintain safety. We're friends. We're just talking about something that has low stakes. We're just being curious. If you can maintain that atmosphere, that is the fertile ground where they can actually get new information and think about it. And that's the best you can hope for. Like Gene said in the beginning, that gives away the whole game. You cannot change someone's mind. You can only cultivate an atmosphere where they change their own mind. That is the beginning and end of this. Everyone is the hero in their own story, and we're going to go into this more later. But if you really keep that in mind, then the moment that you switch to like attacking their position, you become the villain, and the hero becomes even more of a hero when they attack the villain. So you got to really keep in mind this idea of safety, rapport, friends. I'll just say what I was going to say later. Chris Voss has a whole book about this, Never Split the Difference. His theory about communication kind of relies on this idea that like every interaction you have, you're giving the person a role to play, and you take on a role. So like, in a marital dispute, if you're accusing your spouse of something, you're giving them the role of the accused. How does the accused act? Defensively. So if you want your spouse to be defensive, accuse them of something and they'll be defensive at you. But if you approach it with a totally different mindset of like, hey, they're the hero in their story, maybe they had a good reason, be like, hey, I'm confused about this. Can you help me? You're maintaining that role of hero for them. Does that make sense? Are these resonating?
Yes.
Yeah, they're resonating with me.
Okay.
And I'll have to say that I have always been right about everything until I realize I'm wrong about something.
Right. And if you watch the Mormonish 2.5-hour episode about this, like that's one of the best insights, Gene, is like when you're wrong, you feel the same as if you're right. Like it's the moment of realization that you're wrong where it changes. But until you have that aha moment, being wrong feels in all practicality the exact same way as being right. Your brain has to realize you're wrong and then you feel differently. But that doesn't change the fact that in the moment, feeling wrong feels right.
That's a good point. Good point.
I've actually experienced something like that where, like, if you're in somebody's house and you're in a room that you didn't start out in or whatever, and somebody says, which direction is north? And you could point the direction you think is north, and it might be totally wrong because somebody will say, oh, no, that it can't be north because of something else. And then until you realize why, you're still going to think that you're right until and they were wrong.
Perfect example. Like when I'm doing anything having to do with directions or driving, like I'm a pretty terrible navigator, but a lot of the times I feel like, well, I'm confident this time, and I'm so often wrong, and so I just have to learn, which is one of the skills, to talk tentatively. Always leave the door open that you're wrong. In fact, the book Misbelief by Dan Ariely, why intelligent people believe irrational things, that's one of the biggest points in that book, is if you can't convince the person you're talking to that you are just as open to I'm the one wrong and you're right and I want to have my mind changed, if you can't convince them of that, then that's kind of a prerequisite for any sort of good conversation to happen. You have to convince them that you're on the level, you could be wrong, and maybe they have something to teach you. If that is genuine, then that has the best chance of having that interaction go well. Okay. And then the last thing, and again, this is so hard, but the extent to which you can't validate, empathize, and build that shared safe space is the extent to which you are the problem and the irrational one. If your goal is to have a free flow of information and mutual learning, if that's your goal, then you are irrational if you break that and say, hey, you're wrong, you're missing this, you're whatever. If you make it unsafe at all, I'm here to tell you, in that moment, you have turned off their brain, and that conversation is no longer two-sided. You are having two isolated silos having sounds come out of your mouth or across the internet or whatever the medium is, but there is no interaction with the actual conscious, contemplative part of your brain. And unfortunately, because the onus is on us, it's your fault. Like, yeah, we can hope that they would be rational and care that, you're saying that they're wrong and you can back it up. But human nature just is not that way. Maybe 5% of people really can take that, but 95% of people can't. Okay, so the big idea is everyone is resistant to changing their mind, and for good reason. Everyone has a threshold for change, but that's different for everyone. Before that point, people don't care about new information. They only care about validating what they already believe. And whatever you're going to give them, they're just going to fit, shoehorn, justify, diminish, turn off, discredit, or discard what you have to say. So the first big idea is what I call the Chesterton fence. It's this idea, G.K. Chesterton said, don't take down a fence unless you know why it was put up in the first place. So here's this picture of, a fence that is protecting people from a huge cliff. And that's how you should think of whatever thing you're talking about that you disagree with. If you don't understand why they think that belief is good and right and safe and protects their identity, then you are at a huge disadvantage to try to convince them out of it. They're going to resist you. They're going to attack you until, whatever pain is great enough so that they themselves are like, oh, this belief is causing me so much pain that I'll change. Does that analogy help at all?
Yeah, I think there's a corollary. I know that sometimes character flaws and even the what's it called when somebody's being overbearing and selfish. There's a word for it that's popular nowadays. Everybody wants to say somebody is somebody who's only considers themselves. It's
Solipsistic.
say that again.
Solipsistic.
It's even more in use commonly. Narcissistic.
Okay.
So some narcissistic traits are developed at an early age as a way of protecting you, because things happen when you're a child, that you develop things that is your own self trying to protect you from some sort of harm that you perceived when you were young. And so that becomes a big character flaw as you get older. And so that's what I understand.
Gotcha. But yeah, so whatever we're talking about, like the church, I mean, think of how big this fence is for people who are still in the church. Like if you say something against the church, you are really in reality talking bad about their beloved youth leader or the bishop that changed their life. Like, how dare you attack these good people? You know, like that's how they perceive it in their brain. That's what the fence is they're protecting. They're protecting all these good experience, good memories, and good associations they have with what you're talking about. From David McRaney's book, he says this: when a person's expectations are subverted, they may experience intense, inescapable psychological trauma that results in the collapse of the entire model of reality they once used to make sense of the world. Psychologists who study this trauma have discovered that afterward, people tend to take one of two paths. Some go down a maladaptive spiral, turning to drugs or other kinds of self-destructive behavior, circling lower and lower until they hit a dark stasis. That's a lot of the case. I can't remember the percentages now. And then another small percentage experience what's called post-traumatic growth. But the reason I bring that up now is because people are scared to have their strongly held beliefs challenged, because they know on some psychological level that if this is wrong, their whole world is going to collapse, and they are literally protecting their safety from that trauma. Does that make sense?
As someone who's been through it, yes, because that's what happened when, like I deconstructed from the church. Like there was this, like, for me, there was a lot of buildup to it, but there was a pretty kind of defining moment where I felt intensely kind of this feeling of the world around me kind of collapsing in a way. And like just the rug being pulled out from under your feet kind of. And yeah, it was just something that I was just going through mentally. Well, I was physically just standing in my kitchen, but like everything was just flipping and falling and just all over. And so I can say that, I mean, what we're protecting ourselves from, like this pain, I mean, it's real because it was painful. It definitely wasn't fun at all. But once you get through that part, I think it's so much better on the other side. But there's, I guess I can say I understand it's not just an unfounded fear. It is a very real one, because it is unpleasant to go through.
Right. I'm glad you said that, because like my goal here is really to change the way you perceive the people you're talking to. Like even though you can show them the facts that they're objectively wrong, like they are just wrong, and you can prove it. Even in those extremely clear cases, they are being, on some level, extremely practical and rational by holding on tightly to that belief. They don't want to experience that pain. I mean, for me, I don't know how long my period of existential dread was, but it was at least a few months where I would wake up in cold sweats being like, oh my gosh, I can't confront this idea that I might not exist. Like, holy cow, like, it was just so painful. And like it takes a lot to get through that, to, be stable again. Like, and some days really, like, some of the ideas of the church, they are beautiful. Like a part of me still wishes they were true. So anyway, yeah. Just when you're interacting with people, no matter how irrational the belief, that is often what you're up against. You're attacking their livelihood. If it's some disagreement over money or business practices, like, people want to think that their livelihood is doing good in the world. If you attack that, all the walls are up, and they're going to fight against you. Their beliefs, their politics, same thing. They want to view themselves as the hero. They if they're wrong, their whole world crumbles, and they have to rebuild from scratch. That takes a lot of a person. Like, really, you're going to ask that of a person? So anyway, Chesterton fence, huge idea. This is a podcast between Seth Andrews and David McRaney, and he goes over this idea of safety and maintaining that they're not going to be attacked, that they don't have a danger of that huge thing happening or attacked as a person or their identity. That is the number one goal. Like we said on our 8-panel podcast, my biggest regret in distancing myself from the church was being like, oh, I've learned the truth. I got to be direct and tell all these people the truth. And I did more harm than good to the people that I did that to. So
every ex-Mormon a missionary. That's what I say.
Yeah, that was my assumption. But I did more harm objectively with the direct approach. I really regret, telling the people I did when I should have been more strategic, and I was sympathetic and kind about it, but I gave the game away, and they did not want to hear my facts. They did not want to hear the conclusion that I learned that it wasn't true. They did not want to hear that. And every relationship except for maybe 2 who are still in the church has been objectively worse for me because I told them.
For a lot of people, it's, you're telling me if the church is wrong, I won't be with my dead favorite relative.
Exactly. That's their Chesterton fence. If this is wrong, you are taking away this comforting belief that gives my life so much meaning, and I want to love this person. How dare you take that away from me? I mean, that's not exactly how their brain would do it, but I'm getting close.
I try to tell people, you can still believe that you're going to be with your dead favorite relative. You just don't need 15 old men to tell you how to do it.
Oh, I like that. That provides a path of safety still.
Yeah.
Gene, that's brilliant. I love it. But maybe too much information than they're ready for. I can't gauge every circumstance. But anyway, this is David McRaney and Seth talking about the importance of safety.
Safety is a big part of how we reach people, even ourselves, right?
It's the number one thing. Like so like all brains are resistant to change by default, because through the process of assimilation and accommodation, which is assimilating is making sense of the world based off what you already understand, and then accommodating is making room for something you didn't understand by expanding the range of your like abstraction space. You do that enough over the course of your life, it gets pretty dense and complicated, and your models are pretty robust, and the risk versus reward, like if you change your mind, you could become wrong, but if you don't change your mind, you might stay wrong. We tend to err on the side of, well, the models what got me to where we're at so far. So you already have that baseline resistance that has to be overcome by enough counter attitudinal or counterfactual information to put you over a line, over a threshold. But that line gets higher and higher. The resistance gets stronger and stronger depending on all the other motivations you have to maintain the model. And as Brooke Harrington, the great sociologist, told me, the equals MC square of social science is that the fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death. And when the ship is going down, we'll put our reputations in the lifeboat and we'll gladly go to the bottom of the ocean. The belonging goals trump accuracy goals every single time. And if by any intonation, if you are suggesting, whether you're reading something or it's on television or it's in a conversation, if the suggestion is you will be shamed for changing your mind, if you risk ostracism, social costs, and so on, if you like in the communication, if you like suggest that to somebody, even if you don't intend to, that's going to cause the most resistance. And even just from like the tone of your approach, you can generate what they call reactance in therapeutic models, which is the sense that some stimulus is causing me to feel like my agency is under threat, my freedom is under threat. If you say, I think you should believe this or think this directly to a person, you should put this in your mind and take what you have in your mind out and replace it, or so other people think you should do that, then they, as they put it, the stimulus generates a motivational arousal to reduce the stimulus. What that means is they get pissed off and angry, and it happens. You have no choice. It just bubbles up inside you. This negative affect takes over, and you want to push away from the conversation or end it, and because the stimulus is the other person.
Okay, there was a lot there, but what stood out to you, and I'll highlight what I want people to take away. Go ahead.
Okay. There's a lot there. And now I'm losing my thoughts because it's what was at the end of it is now standing out to me more than what was at the beginning.
You say that, Maven, and I'll go to my thing earlier.
Okay, no, you start then with the earlier thing.
Okay, so when you said social death is worse than like actual death, it makes me think about when people are shamed because they had some secret life, they were sexually abusing somebody, and so they go to jail and then they commit suicide because they'd rather be in jail than face the social death among all the people that had thought highly of them.
That's a good example.
Yeah,
or when knowing something's about to come out like that. And that's kind of funny because it's actually kind of like combining. Well, it's not combining the two. It is right in line with what he said, that a physical death is better. So some have it either in jail after caught, or if they are aware that it's coming and they can't avoid it beforehand, some have taken themselves out before the possibility of arrest and whatnot. But I'm also wondering, like, it can't be all the time because we all face that at some point. Like, there's a point for me where I knew that there's a social cost to pay. And while I maybe took my time getting to the point of making the decision to pay that social cost, most of us did get to a point where we did, where, we did pick truth over and facts over our reputations in our community and our relationships, even with family. So I guess, so was he maybe talking just initially how brains work unless something is painful enough to get us to pass that barrier?
Yeah. I'll go into it in more detail, but just to piggyback off what you just said. So I'm writing a book about faith crises, and I'm learning that most faith crises, there's many exceptions, but most actually don't begin with a problem with the beliefs. Most faith crises really start as a crisis of trust or a crisis of belonging. That's my own story. I no longer felt belonging with my family or with my church group. And that is what caused me to be like, okay, now I can evaluate these ideas. If I still had that strong association with those groups, I probably couldn't have been objective and evaluate my beliefs objectively. I would have still been biased and been like, no, these are my safety, but they were no longer my safety. They caused me pain. And so that's when my brain was open and I could change those beliefs, but not before.
Oh, that's interesting. Because I've always wondered when I'm looking back at my life and I'm realizing like what some of these moments were that did feed into things down the line, but in the moment seemed to have no. And I've thought before, like, oh, the time that this thing happened, that could have been something that if I'd been willing to think about it more, I could have been out 10 years ago or 5 years ago, or, I could have been out at any one of these.
Yeah, but why didn't you think about it more?
Yeah, that's always been the question. Why not? But that I think is at least part of the answer, if not the whole answer, is that I still had enough belonging to I guess to shore up against the dangerous idea that was coming in, and it maybe was planted, but yeah.
You have encapsulated the human experience. Like, again, that first chart, like, our beliefs don't come from nowhere. They come from a place. And when that place is no longer something that you trust or associate with, that's when beliefs have a chance of changing, but not before. Usually, again, there's lots of exceptions, but in general, the pain of the current belief has to be so intense that you can't live your daily life unless you change that belief. That's what it takes for a belief to change on its own. But if these other things happen, like a crisis of like, hey, I don't really associate with these people who believe this, then it's a lot easier to be like, oh, now I can actually evaluate this because I don't have the social structure and the lattices in David McCraney's book that shore up these beliefs and insulate it from real examination. It's irrational to evaluate and change your beliefs if your life is going pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of
Yeah.
had a two-stage crisis of trust. The first stage was that I still felt like the Joseph that we all grew up thinking about, to the Joseph Smith, and the Jesus, the loving, the Savior that said, love one another, love each other as as you love me, and all those things, wasn't being exhibited by the church leadership. Their stances against gays and then historically against blacks didn't sit right with me, and so I
Yeah, a
just
group
figured
that
that,
you identified with. Now you're saying, hey, they don't have my values. I don't
yeah,
identify.
that like they were apostate, not me.
Yeah, that's a crisis of trust, I would argue.
Yeah, and then the second stage of the crisis of trust is not. Then I found out the real history, we'll say, and then I thought, wow, they were lying to me this whole time. I had 40 years of Sunday school. They could have told me about the rock and the hat or about Joseph Smith's plural wives situation. And I don't recall being instructed on those things. So, yeah, so it's a two-stage, and that was like strike two is all I needed.
Right. And that's why I like that clip, because it says very clearly belonging goals trump accuracy goals every time. So as long as you have that belonging and association, those beliefs are going to be insulated. But if you care about accuracy, you have to understand the Chesterton fence analogy. And that's why, it's really a fool's errand to be like, I'm going to convince this person with facts out of their position. They're not going to do that. They have to be in an atmosphere. They have to be ready. That all these other things have to be in place. In fact, to the extent, I don't know if I should share this because it's really demoralizing, but in Dan Ariely's book, he actually suggests that like people will not change their minds unless you actually first, step one is build a community for them to go to that will accept them with this new belief. That's step one, is they have to feel like I already have acceptance in a new group where this new belief is safe.
Basically, it's just the idea of inclusion, especially if we're looking at to U.S. politics. Conservatives have more of a smaller tent kind of view of things, and there's a lot of people who are outsiders. And I've heard a lot of people say that like what we need to do is show them that we have a bigger tent, so that it's not them against us, but they are part of us. And I think that's difficult to do because that's also a belief that you would have to convince them of. If it is there, it's not just enough to create the space that it's there, but you still kind of have the same problem of convincing them that this space is here for them.
In a way, there's a virtual community, and that's all the people that have appeared on Mormon Stories, I'll say.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of my ability to decide, because once I lost my testimony, I was like, well, I'll still attend because it's my community. Maybe it's the best way still to live, even if it's not true. And honestly, I think the biggest thing that pushed me out of that and was like, no, I can leave is I had this like, hey, there's lots of ex-Mormons. I can have a family and belonging there. Like, look at all these videos online.
I'm not the only crazy one.
Yeah, because there's so much to deconstruct that some people, you really have to take it like a little piece at a time. And so, for some people, it's the community is what they need, but for other people, there's just certain ideas that are still, have still stuck around. So it's like, okay, maybe I know the church isn't true, but I'm still aligned with it politically, even though a lot of the political ideas are informed by the religious beliefs. Now the religious beliefs are gone. That doesn't automatically reconfigure into the like political beliefs that were based on those. And so we see that all the time, where people maybe initially deconstructing feel that those who are out and have been out for a while are just, like crazy purple-haired liberals that are just like all the way over there and just accepted all of the things. And so there's got to be kind of spaces along the way for people to be safe at while they're deconstruct. And I guess that's what's hard, because I think when there's it's hard to find spaces for people who are still holding on to ideas that we view as problematic while they're in the middle of deconstructing other views that we also agree are problematic. So we've got this, safety, and we've got this companionship and understanding here. And it's hard not to be frustrated that also these things aren't coming with at the same rate to be where we're at already. So.
Right. And to bring it back to the clip, like what you said is really the key. Like all those steps, you have to make it safe the whole way. And that's where it becomes practical, is when you're having the conversation, your number one goal is to minimize what David McCraney calls reactants. If you trigger a reactant, their brain is off, you are a villain, they are going to attack you, and in attacking you, they're reaffirming their hero status and going to be entrenched in that wrong belief even more. You are literally doing more harm than good. Your number one goal, you have to change your heart to not care about being right, about showing how much pain and suffering that position implies, how many facts are missing that they're missing. All of those things, even though true, undermine your mission. Your mission is to keep it safe, keep you on a peer level, or I would actually go so far as to say keep and validate and what's the word I'm looking for? But like buffer, flatter, maybe. Oh, I kind of hate that word. But keep in their mind that they have this status of good guy and hero. That's when they're contemplative, or at least have the best chance to be considering of what you have to say. I know that's hard. I hate it. I wish it weren't true, but that's the facts as I understand them.
So is this where we're going into now, where there's kind of like the how to apply what we're learning, or do we still have some more slides about how the brain works in general?
Yeah, I really kept the brain stuff minimal for this presentation. So yeah, just to go forward in the slides, and then we'll get to the part that you mentioned where it's the practicalities. So yeah, we kind of went over this. When you're talking about these issues, you are actually dealing with an entire lifetime constructed wall of a person's facts, their experiences, the lens by which all these things are sifted, and a person only shifts on their own if these things are so painful that they can't maintain the old belief. So that's the difference between accommodation and assimilation. The clip went over mentioned that a little bit. But again, for this presentation, the emphasis is on just holding that space for those things to be how they value them, and those things are still good and they can still value those things. We're just talking about ideas. We're not attacking you as a person, your past, or your identity. Like that's the goal. It's hard, but that's the goal. Okay, I guess I did have a little bit more about the brain and the problem. So our brains are optimized for speed and safety, not accuracy. Our social connections matter a great deal more than facts on average. Again, there's some exceptions. I would guess maybe 5% of the population. And then especially with the growth of social media, it adds to this idea of tribal confidence. Like I've had many conversations where they will even admit like, okay, yeah, you have a lot of stuff and that makes sense, but I'm going to go do research with my tribe and get back to you. And then I'll be able to tell you why you're still wrong. Like, I don't care that I have all this overwhelming things that only points to one conclusion. I'm going to go back and get the answer that I want, and then engage you with alternative facts, you could say. People are uncomfortable and otherize, shun difference. In the book, David McCraney says like this idea of belonging over accuracy is actually, again, evolutionarily advantageous, because if you changed your opinion and mind a lot, back in the day when we were hunter-gatherers, like you were probably viewed as like not stable or trustworthy or reliable, and you would be shunned from the group, and shunning meant death. So you didn't really care that much about accurate beliefs so much as you cared about being good with your tribe that gave you those beliefs. When our beliefs are threatened, it can activate the same parts of the brain as if when we are being physically threatened. we want to think of ourselves as good and consistent, which is another barrier to changing our opinion, even in light of overwhelming facts. And then I forget there's a specific name for this, but like we don't know what we don't know. So all of those things come into play when we're having conversations with people. And yeah, like we already said, we don't reason well. We're rational. We're capable of reason, but more often than not, we rationalize to keep what we want to be true rather than think objectively. And when I was in the church, I hated this quote by David Hume, where he said, reason is in the service of our feelings. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? But anyway, I hated him for a long time because of that. But now I see that he's true. Like our feelings are primal. And in the research of Jonathan Haidt, he has the analogy of the elephant and the rider. Mm-hmm. And we think we should engage with the rider, the rational brain, the person who's on the elephant steering everything, when in reality, the elephant has all the power. The rider does hardly anything in the grand scheme of, making decisions and, what we are comfortable with. And we need to engage on a primal level, that elephant, that lizard brain, keep them safe, keep them the hero, don't make them react. And that's where we're going to get the results.
I think you're talking about
the
Dunning-Kruger effect, where
Very
you don't
relevant.
know what you don't know. So you think that you have all knowledge.
Exactly.
Not necessarily. I feel like the Dunning-Kruger effect is a little bit more because you can know that there's stuff that you don't know and be very kind of open and humble about it. But I think the Dunning-Kruger effect responds to being very confident that you do know everything, like because you don't know what you don't know, that you think you know everything. So I think there's just a slight difference there.
Yeah, I would just add that like it's more comfortable to think that you know more than you don't. And so when you're given facts that go against something, you want to minimize that cognitive dissonance. And the easiest way to do that is attack the source of that new information.
Yeah. And I think like people who do know a lot about things, like somebody who's a scientific expert and has studied something their whole lives, they are more likely to speak with hesitant or hedging or just not complete absolute language, because even though they know more than maybe anybody else possibly in the world on a subject, they do have this space in their mind for things that they don't, or for exceptions, or for things to change in the future, and their language reflects that. Whereas people who have maybe zero knowledge on something are quite confident to speak in absolutes.
Oh my gosh, that is brilliantly said. And it reminds me, I think Brian Tracy is the one that first introduced me to this idea of like the circles of knowledge. Like when we know very little, like the outline of knowledge is pretty small, but the more we know, the more we realize what we don't know.
Right.
And so that example with the expert is very apt. They are well versed in the body of research. They know the strengths and weaknesses. They know the things that are still being researched that could disprove everything, if science bears that out. And so they have the emotional and knowledge competence to talk tentatively, because they know that there's a lot that they still don't know and could be true in the future.
And
but
it's the willingness to learn.
Want to do that.
It's the willingness to learn that allows you to expand your understanding of things.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're getting on to the practicality or how to do it.
One more point on that. So the moment that they can label you as a threat or other, their brains turn off and you have lost. So all those things go to that. Okay. So now the solution. Okay, number one, realize that being wrong feels the same as being right. We went over that. People are being rational by avoiding thinking about the thing that they are probably most likely wrong about. Truth can't be established until we agree on the definitions and conditions of things. That's chapter 4 of David McRaney's book. It goes into a lot of that. I haven't had a lot of success with this. Very, 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 very few people I engage with want to take the time to really go through any topic on that level. But he says that's absolutely necessary if you're going to have a rational conversation. When a person is threatened, they react defensively. We can't copy paste your reasoning onto another. And we We can't change minds. We can only set the circumstances where they change it themselves. Okay, so that brings me to the new stuff that I created just for today. So we're going to start with what I call the laws of dysfunction. So without any of this training, Maven, you mentioned street epistemology. We're going to get into that. That's one of 3 solutions that David McCraney gives as specific methods that have the best chance of working. But let's start off with like what kind of the default is. So like imagine you're online, you have a disagreement with someone. In my view, this is how it typically goes. So I'm the person being unreasonable that is clearly, has the position that's misinformed or, not factual based misinformation. So number 1, assume you know everything. When I talk from my side, I have the truth. And if someone disagrees with me, I don't really have to engage with them on the facts. This I realized recently. You can have all the facts, you can be kind, you can do all this good stuff. Like, I don't know what a good example is, but like some public policy that is clearly pro-social, clearly helps, society as a whole. And then all a person that disagrees with you has to do is be like, well, they're only doing that program that helps all these people and solves all these problems because you want them, they want you to vote for them, or they want to use it for a fundraising thing. Like they don't have to engage on the merits of the topic at all. All they have to do is invent a bad motive, and no matter the good, the objective awesomeness and fact-based thing that happens as a result of that, all they have to do is be like, yeah, but they're a bad person. So anything that comes from them is bad. Have you guys seen this in action?
Yeah.
The label anti-Mormon does that.
Exactly. It's a shorthand to be like, I don't have to confront what you're saying. You're a bad actor, so I can discount everything you're saying. I hate this so much.
Yeah. I think too, for like, I'm thinking of like universal healthcare, funding for that, and also anything, that will fund and make schools better for children. If it's coming from the party that you don't like, then it's not really about people's healthcare. It's not really about educating children. There's something nefarious underneath. Right?
Yes, and I have enough experience in disagreement and communications to say confidently that once someone makes a motive or intention-based argument, they have no interest in truth. You should not engage with that person. They are a moving goalpost constantly. They have no interest in a rational discussion. They've already made their decision, and they don't care what argument they have to use. It can be the most flimsy, dumb argument in the world. As long as it backs them up, they don't care. So again, as we said in the beginning, like even the best, like if you're trained for years on street epistemology, the best case scenario is 10% of the time they'll change their position. Mm-hmm. So now we're talking about, unfortunately, the random dude on the internet that you're engaging with, like they're a bad actor. They have no good faith intent in that conversation at all. But that's just one of the tells that you can find that like, okay, this person really has no interest in learning.
For example, a person told me that the church was true because it was growing by leaps and bounds. And then when I showed how much the church was actually growing like below the birth rate or something like that of America or the world, then they said, oh, well, we have to separate the wheat from the chaff, and, only the faithful, will survive, and even the elect will, fall away. So as long as I stay true, then I'm right, kind of a thing. And
yeah, they're not curious. They just want to back up what they already believe, and they don't care how they have to get there.
Okay.
But I just wanted to highlight particularly the motive part. So, okay, other things that happen by default is you go fast. You give them a lot of reasons up front to consider, and you leave behind what I'm calling consent. So in my rules that, again, very few people interact with, but when they do agree, it actually does help, is we never move on or go ahead in the conversation until we both agree on the previous premise. So like, this program has helped this many people. Do we both agree on that? Regardless of the motivation of the politician who did it, we agree that the program itself has done this specific good. It has helped, 20,000 families out of poverty or whatever it is. And until we both agree that that is a fact, we can't move on. But, the opposite of that is you say, well, this and this and this and this, so therefore I'm right. And you've gone so fast that you leave the other person behind, and all they have to do in their irrational dysfunction is take issue with how you worded something, or again, going back to motivations, and it's just an exercise in futility. Okay, this one's big, and I think applies to even the most rational among us, and that is in conversing about the truth, about a position that is rational, that is the most justified by the facts. That's usually my goal when I try to convince things of people, is like, look, this is just what makes the most sense from all the facts. Like, can't you see that is just where the facts lead? Like, I don't really have a dog in the fight of like whether, the consequences of it. I'm just here to see reality. This is what reality is telling me, and I want to see if you can see what I'm seeing. Like, that's usually my goal. But there's lots of other goals that we often have, including myself. So I just listed some. Let me read them. So often, instead of that, we get distracted by the need to validate yourself, validate that your opinion matters and is worth considering. You get distracted by defending your ego or your honor, or pronouncing to the world that you were wronged and unearthing this wrong that you think everyone should know about. Yeah, you can do that, but just be honest that that's your goal. Your goal is not to change minds. The goal is not to, improve the situation. Your goal is to shame someone. Assert your superiority, play the blame game, or avoid embarrassment. You desire to punish someone or humiliate them, or, a whole bunch of other things. But do you see how, even if you're on the side of right, objectively with the facts, that often even the best, most rational among us kind of get distracted and put energy and time into one of these activities?
Basically, you're saying that even if we are on the side of like truth and evidence and logic, we get distracted by these things that ultimately undermine our credibility.
Yes,
and the chance, that we have to actually improve or help somebody with that knowledge.
Effect change.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why David McCraney says, like, if you generate reactants, you've lost the argument. And any one of those distractions is going to make them defensive, even though I'm 100% on board with you. You could be totally justified in one of those things. Maybe their position is harmful. Maybe, like, they did, like, do something against your honor that is not true, and you have every right to defend your honor. Like, I'm sympathetic completely to those distractions. But again, you're being irrational if your goal is to improve the situation, to change minds, to get the best information out there. So just be aware of why you're doing what you're doing. That's the big idea.
You have examples of not dysfunction, like instead of assuming you know everything, you say, I could be wrong, but...
Yes, so that's the next slide. So this is the laws of safety. This is so hard, but I promise you that it is absolutely necessary. This is a precondition for any healthy, good conversation to happen. And I talked about it earlier with Dan Ariely's book. You have to convince the other person that, hey, maybe I'm the one wrong. Maybe you have something to teach me. And you have to convince them that that's really what you think. You have to change your own mind first. What I mean by that is what I just said. You have to model that, hey, I could be wrong. I'm open to new information. You could be right. You have to model that. But even more important to that is you really do. You have to convince yourself that your heart is in the right place. You don't want to win. You don't want to put someone down. You don't want a great soundbite, a zinger to use in some, promotion or whatever. You have no other motivation truly than to talk about this topic and to learn and to maybe have the other person learn. Like, you have no other ulterior motives. It's hard to do. Like, I get a ton of what's the word, like pride, or I don't know, like to show someone like, look, you by your premises, the conclusion does not follow, and you used a fallacy here, so you're wrong and I'm right. I get a rise out of that. I love being right and showing someone else is wrong. But if I have that mindset, I'm going to do more harm to the greater good of that shared space where there's safety than if I go into it with like, I'm going to be neutral. I just want this person to feel safe. And my goal in this conversation is to have a safe conversation for them. That is the only way they're going to listen.
It's like
I've
you could
noticed
win a
in
battle,
myself,
but not the war.
I've noticed in myself, my ability to be able to do this depends, like really entirely depends on whether or not I think the other person is capable of it, if that makes sense. So on a topic that I feel quite passionate about, I do tend to view most other people who would engage with me as dishonest actors, maybe, or disingenuine, and I feel that they may, they may seem to on the surface act like or appear like they're trying to have a conversation that they don't really want to. And I might not always be the best judge of that. And there have been oftentimes, actually, I would say the majority of the time that I've engaged in a conversation that I was thinking was meant to be genuine, and maybe even in the course of the conversation felt that it was. I have often, like after the fact, come around to thinking, I don't think they were being genuine. I think they were acting, and then I lose any like chance of respect or a similar engagement as I had with them before. But for people that I do think that I am able to do that, and so it's pretty rare. But I have, like, in the queue, I have some an interview with two people who I do feel like were engaging with me. And so it's, even though I still get really upset and I want to be spicy at them for things that I disagree with and things that I've said, I do find it a lot more difficult to treat them that way, because I believe that, our conversation was had in sincerity, on both sides. I don't want to do that. Whereas for someone else, that's my first go-to. I will go there first because I don't think they were ever like being honest in the first place.
Maven, you are preaching to the choir. I'm actually 100% on board. And let's really dig down. I think you touched on the thing that is actually the number one hardest thing for me personally. And I want to drill down, like, what can we do? Because I think both you and I struggle with this, because if they're being a bad actor, if they're actually not, willing to learn or whatever, we both have a hard time pretending as if that's not the case.
Yeah.
But we know from the laws that if we act with authenticity of like, hey, you're not being fair, you're not engaging in good faith, we're being authentic. We're tapping into like something that is good and right and true. But in doing that good and right, true thing, we're turning off the other person. Yeah, they may be a bad actor,
but it's hard because
treat them like that, right?
If you're playing along, it almost feels like you're also being dishonest in playing along with the dishonesty.
Yes, this is the hardest thing for me. I can't pretend when the facts are clearly that, like, dude, you're being an a-hole and you are like bouncing around and not being honest. So here's the kind of the things that I've started off with to answer that. But first, I want to ask if you have any things, because I still, despite what I'm about to say, still struggle with it. So Gene or Maven, do you have any answers to that? Knowing that it's irrational, that you're going to turn them off even more if you engage authentically, like, how can you balance your need for authenticity and the goal of, hey, even if I disagree with this guy, even if I think they're bad and wrong, the greater good of this person that's my enemy, I like Abraham Lincoln, like, turn them into a friend. Like, there are good things that if you maintain the higher road will result in better outcomes that the authentic road will not.
The only time I think that I'm able to sometimes, I guess, tap into a calmness about what I feel very strongly is evil and unjust. It is, I guess, just occasionally I'm able to put myself in a place, but this may not be exactly where you're going with this. But I'm putting myself in a place where I am being kind or complacent purely for the fact that in doing so, I know that they're going to, by contrast, really show how evil they are just on the surface of it. And I think there's an advantage to that sometimes too. But again, I'm not trying to set up a relationship. I'm not trying to be their friend. I am just acting calmly and rationally in a way that they will say what I think, like the most evil and honest thing out loud, that they'll admit it. And but I still can't always do it that way. But anyway, that's
No, I resonate with that in the following aspects. So like when I'm online and clearly they're a bad actor and they're ignorant and just, not cool. Like, why would people say some of the stuff they've said? It just boggles my mind. But anyway, I often change my goal to be like, okay, they're a lost cause, clearly, but I'm going to continue to be the neutral, steady hand, being curious, giving them the benefit of the doubt, because anyone that reads this conversation later on Facebook usually will have the best chance to agree with me if I maintain myself.
A wider audience.
Yeah. Does that resonate with you a little bit?
Yeah.
And for me, I'll also think that I'll hold space for people, because it maybe took me 10 years to slowly progress from one side of an issue to another. And I notice incremental change. And so I would hope that, humanity is good overall, and that even this bad actor someday can incrementally, have the power to change their mind someday.
Yeah, and that was the second solution. That's the best I've come up with, is like, okay, even though clearly they're not being fair and open-minded at all right now, if I just treat them like, they're a good person and they're being sincere and all the things that they're saying, like they really believe, that has the best chance of maybe like having them consider it still, even if they're not acting like it. Like there are instances where even the worst people are like, I have been thinking about our conversation. I have come around. It's really rare. But it does happen. And so that for me is enough reason to be like, okay, I'm going to treat you like you're being authentic. And then the last one is kind of the video I referenced earlier. It's one of my favorite TED Talks. It's called The Case for Emotional Correctness, I believe. It's by Sally Cohn.
Yeah.
She worked for Fox News and as a gay woman. And her whole talk is about like, look, I was in the belly of the beast, the den of conservatives, and I still maintained compassion for them. And one of the tactics, that's the wrong word, one of the principles that she lived by was like, no matter how strongly I disagreed with this person who was completely opposite of me politically, I would try to say, this position they've come to is a result of some value somewhere that we share. Like, I want safety for my family, and immigrants coming into the country harm or potentially harm my family's safety. We can agree on family safety. Does that make sense? Like, try to force yourself to go to a higher value to agree with the person so you can validate them.
I think, to me, I don't think that's actually that hard, but it's not enough, I guess, to make a difference in how I want to interact with them. Does that make sense?
That's fair.
In a way, I also feel like I'm at a place now where I don't want to acknowledge harm that isn't happening. I don't even want to give the appearance that I'm agreeing, that I can understand, and I can say on the surface, I understand that you think immigrants are dangerous, but I don't want to give the appearance of thinking that I in any way agree with that, or that matches reality when I don't believe it does. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, it does. And I'm right there with you. And I've made this mistake more and more times than I can count. But I'm here to tell you that just the research says that if you maintain that posture, you will more likely do more harm than good. That's just how we react as humans.
I'm really wondering, and maybe I need to read the books to see, are we doing more harm than good? Or is it just, if there's a chance for the change to happen, that we're not doing it the right way? Does that
So
make
like
sense?
there's a time to not sit in the back of the bus.
I'm saying
and
that
get
I think,
arrested.
like, for most people, they're not ready and there's not a chance. Like, for any of these things to work, the other person has to be somewhere where, like, they're genuine, like they're at least genuinely willing to, I mean, like, all these safe places that you're trying to create on their mind, they have to be willing to go there in the first place. You can be trying to set yourself up as someone who is safe and as someone who will listen, but if they've already decided that you're not, there isn't anything you can do. You can do all the same things with them as you would do with someone else, but that they've already decided you're not, so they won't be engaging properly and they won't be engaging sincerely. So I think, like, with all these strategies that we're talking about and working, they only work in the best case scenario if the other person is prepared. But if they're not, then none of these, you can do all of them perfectly and they will not do a thing because the other person isn't ready. So that's what I'm wondering. Like, I don't know if we're actually doing more harm, and are we pushing people further away if they're not ready at all, like, to begin with? Do you understand my question there?
Yes. I
Yeah.
want to validate everything you said. I'm right there with you, but I want to push back on one thing.
Okay.
You use the word, all these things don't work unless. Define work. What is the goal? What is success? Define it.
That's a good question. I think I'm thinking, when I'm thinking work, I'm not necessarily going all the way to the end of convincing them, but even I think to just have an honest conversation, like where we even just have a successful conversation, like we talked about, like with the planting seeds, that we don't need to come out of the conversation having changed their minds, but at least come out having, either given them new ideas or presented new facts or information that just that don't agree with their worldview, but we've done it in a safe enough way that they could at least, like, hear it, and when otherwise they would immediately reject it. Let's say that, just even little pieces of whatever it is that we're trying to do in a conversation, I think won't work for somebody not willing.
And I agree with that. Like, it's just an objective fact that you can do everything the exact perfect way. You can use the perfect words and the perfect tone, and some people will still turn off. Absolutely 100% validate that. But I just want to change your definition of work to, it has the best chance that they will consider the information.
I can agree with that.
That's success. That is success.
So there's also a situation where you could say, in an alternate universe, if there was a lot of going along to get along and there was a lot of compromise, we might still have slavery in America.
I haven't thought about it that far. I want to say no, but I will say this, because I have thought about it some, and like, again, as I said in the beginning, like, this is a general advice. Like, this does not work in every case. Like, right. We can absolutely look at history where, like, I did none of those things. I went against those SOBs and I created this change. That is totally coexists with what I'm saying. I'm just saying what works for the overwhelming majority of one-on-one interactions.
Can I share some more resistance? And I think this kind of agrees a little bit with what Jeannie was just saying. And to kind of bring Mormonism into this more or less, there was like a Relief Society, like a sister to sister BYU Women's Conference talk or something. It's been covered before. It was a question and answer session. One of the questions was something about, feeling disrespected or not listened to by priesthood leaders, and how to deal with that. And the answers were really kind of gross. I think very, very much upholding the patriarchy. And it was all this kind of thing of like, well, are you the problem? And, and it just, growing up in the church, no matter what, where a difference of opinion with a man, like as a woman, you're automatically in the wrong position. and we're automatically trained to question ourselves and question our narrative, or even when we know we're right, to still ultimately fall in line with the man who is over us because he's in charge. And the idea is always that if there is a change that we want to affect, that we got to be like more sweet and more kind and more attentive and more all of these things. And I guess where my distaste is in reading these kinds of things, or trying to get into how to have these proper conversations, is it starts to feel very familiar to me in this regard, where and I don't think that they work. And I think there's a lot of cost in trying to do that. I think there are times when it's appropriate, but I feel that overall, I feel that and most women in Mormonism have been harmed by this idea, because we're the only ones who were majorly expected to act this way, whereas this was not the expectation for men to act this way. And it happens between them too, like in hierarchy, because if you're lower in the hierarchy, it is the same thing. But when we're talking gender wise, it's just a complete split. The women do not ever at any point have any authority over a man beyond the age of a boy, actually beyond the age of 11 now, or usually 12 historically. And so yeah, so I don't know. So I feel like, and I feel like we see this politically too. I feel like the left has been trying to like portray these principles a lot more than the right has. And there's always been like trying to bridge the divide, trying to have these conversations, trying to find middle ground. But at the end of the day, the other side doesn't value those things. They don't want to find common ground. They just want to win. And so when you're the position that you're trying to be kinder to them, you're trying to like do all these extra nice things to them when they don't feel the same in return, it seems like they come to just expect that and feel entitled to that. And so when they get this niceness, or when they get somebody who's willing to engage with them honestly, even though they're not being honestly, that they're being treated with the benefit of the doubt, that we think in our minds that by doing this for them, they'll want to reciprocate. And there is a tendency for that if you're equal, but not if they're already in a position of authority and that are above you, then yeah, there is no reciprocation. And so you just lose more ground, more and more and more ground, because you're giving it up as you're going along the way. And I mean, that's what I feel like I've seen. And I'm tired, Kendall. I don't want to do it anymore. Even if maybe like there's a chance this is the best way to do it. I'm tired and I'm angry. Honestly, I'm angry at having to like put on this like sweet face and sweet voice to deserve being listened to when they're not going to listen anyway. So why not just yell? Why not just say, fuck you, and why not just say like, look, you're not being honest. I'm going to call you out on this, and you don't have good motives. I'm going to call out what your real motives are, because that's a thing too. Like I know when I was in the church, I thought I had a good motive for, going on a mission. I thought I'm bringing the gospel to the world. Right. But I really wasn't. Like, I may have thought that, but that was not true ever, like in reality, even though it was true in my mind.
Okay, can I interrupt you right there?
Yeah.
That's a good example. I want to validate 97% of what you said earlier.
Okay.
It's all so
I just don't want to do it anymore.
To talk about, but just in this moment, I want to take you to that point in time. You were going on a mission. You were convinced that you had all these good reasons to go. But you now know the reality is a lot more mixed. But my question is, if someone confronted you directly and called you out, what effect would that have had? Most likely,
I would have disagreed.
Yeah, you would have been more entrenched.
I don't know if I would have been more entrenched, honestly, than I already was. I was entrenched. So I'm not sure if like the double down is really, I don't know.
But what I want to say earlier is like your experience is completely valid. I myself have witnessed just the absolute trotting underfoot of women in so many areas. And so I really want to make a distinction, even though it is a messy area. I can't make a perfect distinction, but I want to try to separate, hey, intellectual discussions about topics is different than a boundary conversation about how your safety personally is being violated. Like, you absolutely need to have healthy boundaries, and say, hey, if this line is crossed, I'm going to do this. That's just for my self-care. That to me should be absolutely done as a higher priority than having, an intellectual conversation where they listen to you. Like if you're actually being mistreated, you need to get out of there or do whatever you need to do, establish a boundary.
Those two aren't always separate.
Maven,
They're not, and that's why it's messy.
Yeah.
And so I
Here's
want
what you need
to
to say,
validate
Maven.
it, but I also want to say, like, if you do that, most likely you're going to have these consequences. Again, not 100%. Absolutely, there are examples, and I love the examples of someone who rises up, speaks truth to power, and makes a positive change. Absolutely worth.
Look, yeah, because I think it does. Because I mean, some of the things that helped me change from my mission were like conversation seeds that were planted, as I've said before. But some things were harsh things called out and maybe said like in angry tones, angry language, and even with swear words that hurt. But also, if you can recognize that there's an element to truth. They've done none of the things to build up safety, like you've talked about. It's been like shots fired and felt, and those have made a difference. And like one of the most significant things to me, was when I was 16, was a class that I was in where the professor, who was a liberal Mormon, which was very confusing for me at the time because I'd never heard of or really met them, but he was talking about a friend of his who was gay, and the times that he was kicked out of his house, that he's been beat up, lost jobs, been kicked out of housing, and I spoke up for righteousness, I thought at the time, to say like, well, he chose that. And this professor completely lost it on me, just like yelling, shouting, like, how dare you? Why would somebody choose this? Explain to me why it's so worth it if this is a choice, right? And it's not. Why is somebody choosing to do all of these things, to ostracize themselves from family, to make their life this difficult? And why would they not like decide and change their mind when they're in the hospital recovering from a horrendous beatdown? That would not be enough to like put them back and say, you know what, maybe this choice isn't serving me very well. And I had no answer, and I was humiliated in front of my peers. But that was a big thing because the fact that I couldn't come up with an answer really, really weighed on me for several days. So I guess that's why like I struggle with this. I'm struggling with this a lot.
I do too. I'm right there with you. If I were king of the world, I would say no. You be direct every time. We should care about facts and what helps the most people most of the time, and that's what we should base our decisions on. But let me push back in just this way. There's several things I could say, but just let me ask you this. It is my belief that 5% of the population really does have one of their core values to be truth. Like they actually genuinely would be okay with being someone telling them, you're wrong, here's why. And if the rationale was legitimate, they would be like, okay, yeah, I'm wrong. And they wouldn't feel all the things that David McRaney is saying that most people feel when they're wrong. Shame, attacking their identity, like a loss of meaning, like all these things that are often tied up into our beliefs. So let me just ask you, is it more likely that you just value truth more than the average person? Like how likely is that?
I want to think that just as much as anyone else, but I'm extremely skeptical of that. I wouldn't put myself in that 5%. No.
Okay, interesting. Well, that was my avenue. So
that's kind of you. Yeah. But
yeah.
I mean, even when I'm thinking about like when I was being yelled at by this teacher, I wasn't like, hey, that's a good point. I was really distressed and I was angry, but I was also like too shy and quiet to really shout back. And so, initially I was just thinking like, I'm not very good at standing up for righteousness. I still felt I was right. It was something that, I mean, because of the humiliation and my inability to talk back, any further than I did just by that one comment to an authority figure, I really weighed on me, and I had to really kind of think through things. And it was the first time I was thinking, like, is it possible that a prophet of God could be wrong? Because I know prophets have said that it's not a choice, and and that's where I was coming from. But I mean, I did not handle that correction very well. It was humiliating to me.
Well,
eventually it was effective.
Yeah,
I just have to say again that, like, from your story, and I've watched your Mormon story, both parts. It is just my opinion that you are more self-reflective, more contemplative, and more caring about doing the right thing than most people. That's just my perception of you. And I have to say, just statistically, the people who self-select out of high control groups tend to have certain attributes. Again, it's a wide spectrum, and not all people leave for the same reasons. but there is a trend among people who self-select out. And I think adherence to truth is one of the correlatives. So just for what it's worth.
Well, I
So
think too, like that sometimes like pushback and information. So maybe I'm not in a place or I'm in a place where I'm very, very confident I'm right. But if someone has a question for me that I can't answer, to back up what I'm saying, if we were to talk about equality in the church, when I was younger, I would have said, yeah, women are equal and men treat us quite well and maybe even better than how men view women in the outside world. But when you start coming up with examples, that's where things start to fall apart. And maybe again, in the moment, I don't have an answer. In the moment, I am seeing them as a villain. I'm seeing them as trying to destroy my faith. Like they're absolutely somebody I should not be listening to. But just the fact that question landed. And maybe I can push it out for years at a time and not really think about it. But the fact is that it's there and that I don't have an answer for, if they are so equal, then why can't women do this? What would be the terrible thing or what's elevating about women not ever being allowed to handle money in the church, that they could never be a ward clerk, even if they're an accountant for like a top, Fortune 50 company, but yet they cannot ever handle the Lord's money. Where's the equality in that, or what is so debasing for women to do that, where it's not debasing for men? There's the things that just there's not actual concrete answers for, and eventually they add up. But they come from, a seemingly hostile source that I was not open to. So that's why I guess I just don't know if I'm buying that you have to like walk this careful line and be still coddling to somebody to just maybe get them to just maybe.
I know. That's why I said, like, I don't like what I'm about to present, but these are the best facts. I'm here to tell you. And my biggest pushback is if you research Dan Gilbert, like look him up. He made me wise to this fallacy. I think it's called the fallacy of false vividness. And what the fallacy of false vividness says is like, look, humans, it's just a fact. We're bad at statistics. And we have all these heuristics, all these shortcuts of saying, hey, this is true because of this. Not because it's true. If you really zoom out and look at all the individual examples, that's too hard for our brain. We want to just pick out examples that we like, and we base our opinions off of that. So I would just say again that like I totally concede that there are exceptions to these rules. I meant at the beginning that these are just the best rules for most people in general. There's always going to be exceptions, and you, Maven, and Eugene have to be wise of when those exceptions are. But I'm here to tell you that as far as the data, all those times where someone did speak truth to power and made a change, those are in the data the exceptions, and we should still do it. We should advocate. We should do all levers of change. Absolutely. But just what I'm trying to focus on is just the one-on-one interactions with family members, with friends, with people that you want to maintain a relationship with. These are the rules for that.
And from the skills we've learned today, Maven, from the skills we learned today, you could say, I could be wrong, but fuck you.
Yeah. So anyway, going back to the slides, that's the first step, is change your own mind, model curiosity, look for higher values, show that you're just as willing to change and be wrong, and have your own mind changed as the other person. That's step one. Step two is, remember, change only happens in the other person. You could have 10 million more good reasons than you have. And if the other person just only cares about the one reason, like, it's going to have no effect. The only thing you can do on average, again, just these are general rules, is make it about them, make it safe, have their values be validated and their identity protected, and then their mind stays open. This is another hard one. Is Stephen Covey. I was there at BYU, his last public appearance. And he said something that stayed with me my whole life. And it's basically, the law of efficiency is oh my gosh, now I'm completely forgetting it. Anyway, the first premise is something about going fast, but the second premise is like, but when it comes to people, slow is fast. If you try to go fast, you're going to cause more problems, and it'll be overall a long, slow, entrenched process. But if you go slow at first, that in reality is the fastest way when dealing with people. So rule number 3, go slow, get their consent, be like, hey, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Are we on the same page about this small thing that we agree on? And let's build on that thing that we agree on. It's frustrating, I know, but that's
I think I've heard that for other skills too, not just for people, but when you're learning something new, especially if it's coming to muscle memory, that learning, like doing it slow first and doing it correctly is more important than trying to do it quick.
It's like in carpentry, measure twice, cut once. Perfect example.
Yeah, go really slow. Don't make them uncomfortable. You are their peer. You're not a superior. You're not, any better than them. That will cause reactance, and that's a slow process to maintain that.
Okay.
Be interested. Give them praise. Act surprised. Say, oh, I'd never considered that. I didn't know that. Tell me more about that. Like if you can project a warmness and an interest in them, again, Maven is 100% correct. It won't work all the time. In fact, the data shows that it actually overall works a very small percentage of the time. But it is the best chance that you have for a good outcome. And then be safe. Speak from their side. When I first read Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, this is where it comes from, is like when you're dealing with communication, when you're dealing with people, think of it like judo. Like you're not taking all their energy at your face and pushing back against their energy. Think of yourself as redirecting, being like, oh, this racist, xenophobic thing. Like, instead of like saying that, say, when did you first believe that? Or something. Like, I don't know a good example, but like, don't go against them. Just use that energy and redirect it into something hopefully more positive. And that unfortunately entails apologizing, being like, oh, I misunderstood. Could you say that a different way or whatever? I forget.
If you say, why do you feel that way? That's like being interested and being safe.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of being like, well, that is wrong, right? Or whatever. Like you're causing reactance. Just take what they said and redirect it into some positive thing. Like, oh, that must be really hard that you had that experience, or that, someone that was harmed by this group or whatever. Just make it safe. Don't be like, you realize that was racist, right? Like, obviously. But
that's a good point. That's difficult for me to do, because I mean, when it's obvious to me that something is racist or sexist, that it almost sometimes bothers me when people push back against it, when it seems so obvious to me that, again, it gives me this feeling of they're trying to play games with me, and I don't appreciate that. And they might not be. I will say, again, I don't think I'm always the best judge of this anymore, if I ever was, but at least I kind of recognize that I have this tendency when and one of them would be like in pro-life stuff. I want to, pro-life is, I think, backed by data. I absolutely feel that I can back this up very well, that it is always a misogynist take. There's no such thing as a pro-woman or a pro-feminist pro-life take, just inherently, like a married bachelor. But while I know that, and it's very clear to me, other people don't know that. And the first few times I got pushback on it, when people wanted to say that it wasn't sexist, it was just immediate turnoff for me, because it's like, okay, now you're playing games with me. Now you're trying to like play word games and make something sound like it isn't what it is. And because we get that a lot from the church, when the church wants to say like that we treat women better, or there's more equality with us than any other religion, when it's just like, okay, they're clearly not. Like, I don't even want to give you the satisfaction of taking you seriously, even like hypothetically. I do have that tendency, but I do think and I just can't tell the difference really anymore right now between people I think who do deep down know that that's true, and others who really genuinely can't see it, and once like how is this misogynistic? Where is the misogyny? Like I really don't see it. So explain it, like you're saying, explain it in a way for them to be able to see it, rather than just labeling it as I see it and then just moving on from there. I tend to do that. I'll throw out
glad you brought that up.
sexism, misogyny. Yeah, and just
I almost forgot. Like, one of the biggest parts of being safe, and this requires a lot of us. It's really not fair. Like I know I'm asking a lot of us and our audience and each of us as individuals to apply this. It's really not even close to fair. Like, not even. But one of the things is, if you can really try to, whatever facts you have, like pro-life is misogyny, like make that argument in a different way such that it's all from their point of view. Start from their values and make your argument purely based on the way they think. Get inside their mind, and with all the things that they hold on firmly, give them a presentation that leads them to that conclusion, or at least has the best chance to, that speaks from their frame of reference. Everything you say, be like, and this is what, I don't know, upholds the free market or whatever. Like, you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
yeah,
present them in a way that is their perspective. They're not going to change their whole worldview
right
for this argument. So can
Right.
you make your argument inside their worldview? That is part of being safe. It's
Yeah.
asking a lot.
Or
But-
I think even if I can't do it from inside their worldview, at least doing it even from my worldview, where they can see why I'm saying that, and not that I'm just throwing it out there as just like an easy insult or coverall, just as a short way to answer anything they bring up by just saying, throwing a label at them.
Not just a screed.
Yeah, just to say like, this is why, these are the concrete reasons why, this is, for me, this shows misogyny. Then that's at least something that they can work with, or an idea that they can come back on to, or something specific that they can challenge in their own worldview. But it's hard to just challenge when you just throw it out there, just like when they throw at us, like, you're just woke. It's like, you're like, well, what does that mean? That it means different things to you than it means to me. And so you can't really go or start or have any conversation there with your misogynist or you're just woke, because like, what are we even talking about? And
okay,
I'm seeing that's an issue.
I gotta push back, because you said earlier that you don't have in the 5%, like, one of the people who really change because they're curious about truth and what's real. When someone says in a conversation, you're just woke, and you react with, why am I woke? You are proving to me that you are curious. Most people, when
Well,
you call that, would have
I don't usually say that.
They would turn their brain off, and they
Yeah.
would just attack back. The very fact that you said, well, why? I want to understand, to me shows that you really are exceptional in the way that, like, you approach information.
No, but I'm not saying that I did that, because I don't. I was just giving it as an example that both sides could do. Like, when one side will throw out woke as an epithet, the way I will throw out like misogyny as an epithet. I'm just saying, like, for each side, that puts them in a position. There's just nothing to really argue there unless you ask why. And that's what people are asking me. Why is this misogynistic? That's the question that I need to answer. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I just go back to whatever it has the best chance of minimizing any reactance, which I would say, when you throw something out there, that is absolutely what that does in the majority of cases. I would love to be part of those discussions where they don't react that way and they do ask the question why. That's not usually my experience. But again, just all of these things, these rules, these laws of safety, are to minimize the chance that you will cause a reactant in the other person. Because when they are triggered, their brain is off, and you are an enemy, and they want to attack the enemy, and they will just be more entrenched as the good guy because they fought the enemy, like we've been saying.
I guess I can say too that I still think it's valuable to learn all these things. So as much as, like, I'm pushing back now and saying that, I don't want to do the things we're learning about, it's not so much that I think it's valuable to learn multiple ways of dealing with something, because no situation is the same and no context is the same, either the person that you're talking to or even where you're at yourself that day. And so I think it's important to learn these things, even if you disagree with them, and try them out, because it's a skill set that you now have at your availability. And I think it's much better to be able to have skills in your toolbox and to be able to use them and know how to use them properly when you would like to, rather than be stuck in a scenario where you can't use that tool because you don't have it, and and you would, I guess, guarantee that you'll be unsuccessful. So yeah, so I've been pushing back. Sorry, go ahead, Gene.
There's a discipline angle to it, right?
Yeah.
Like in warfare, I remember, and I don't know if this was really happened, like, don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes, right? And that was like to be disciplined, to save your ammunition until you really have a shot where you could actually have more chance of hitting them, your enemy, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, sometimes with discipline and warfare, I guess I'm a general at heart, or I don't know, but you retreat, right? So that you can fight another day, right? So those are some disciplinary, part of your toolbox, is like when to stand and fight, and when to run, and when to regroup, and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I've had times where I've been really calm about something. I remember even like with Mormonism Live, there was somebody, I think it was actually Jim Bennett, was saying something. And I know, like, I could see in the chat, like, I had come on the screen, I had asked him a question, and the chat was going, like, they were like, I'm getting my popcorn. Maven's going to let him know. She's going to let him have it. This, spicy Maven's coming out. She's going to get him. I could see this happening in the chat. But at the moment, all I wanted from Jim Bennett was honesty. And that's what I got from him. And so I didn't push back on it anymore. He knew where I was with it. He knew I disagreed. And so that was, I don't know. I was like, I might be letting the chat down here, but I didn't feel the need to go after him, because again, I wanted him to acknowledge the thing that I was upset about, or the thing that I had a problem with, which he was able to, ultimately disagreeing with me, but still he had that honesty. So I let it go, and it was pleasant. And I don't view Jim as an enemy, but it was fine. And then there've been other times where I've been, in I think a hostile environment, or where I was more or less outnumbered, where I did, I think, behave quite well, and in not being spicy. I think that I came across to be the much stronger and better person overall, and that others more or less made a fool of themselves with me. So anyway, I guess I'm saying I like to think, I like to have the different skill sets so that I can use them most appropriately. And it's in learning those skills that you are able to learn, like, when is appropriate to use them and when not. So
I look forward to the day when Jim Bennett says, yeah, I'm coming over to your side, Maven, and the turning point was 5 years ago when you could have come after me, but you didn't. And that softened my heart.
I don't care if it was or not. Like, I guess I wasn't doing that just to get him to agree with me someday. It's just where I was, honestly, like, in that conversation. So anyway, sorry for that. We can get back to this.
Yeah, no, that actually kind of goes into what I'm saying, is like, look, this is not gonna work quickly. Like, this, first of all, takes years of practice and training. Like, I've been at this for at least 3 years when I've done, like, the formal programs and, like, paid money for, like, courses and stuff, and I still give myself maybe a C+. I mean, I love calling people out and highlighting their fallacies. And when I'm on the chat for, like, any Exmo podcast, like, I love just railing on the bad arguments and stuff. Like, my goal is different in different contexts. Mm-hmm. But if my goal is to change someone's mind, these are the things that change people's minds, or at least, again, have the best chance.
The rational approach.
Yeah. Well, I have problems with that. Like, again, like our first slide, like, if we were really rational, giving people facts would work, but it doesn't work. It's the human, it's the rational way, taking human nature, which is irrational, into account. That's what I'm trying to advocate. So another expectation to keep in mind, social media is just about the worst environment for positive change to occur. Like, it is literally built from the ground up to have reactance, another word for engagement. Just like have people strongly react, be in their tribes, dog pile. Like it's the worst. Maybe 0.5 of 1% chance of a positive change. Does positive change happen? Yes. Like I was about to show a recent interaction I had on Facebook about book banning, where I practiced these, and I don't know that I convinced anyone, but the conversation remained civil and it didn't, escalate. So, I really think it had the best chance of getting them to rethink. So yeah, have your goal not be to change minds, but rather to have them consider. And that was my only goal, sincerely, with the book banning conversation. Is like, well, if there was evidence of not banning for appropriate reasons for children, but rather purely ideological banning, like, would you be interested in that evidence? Like, I was so slow. It was, I wanted to claw my eyes out, but I'm here to tell you, it was objectively the best way to go about it, to not turn people off. Change in the best case scenarios, like you're trained, it's on a subject that like is overwhelmingly obvious that it's true. Like, even in those huge advantage cases, the best research is change only happens 10% of the time. You will never have more success greater than the pure motives you're really operating under. Like we said before, like, don't get distracted with all these other things. Like, you really have to understand, why am I doing what I'm doing and what do I want? It's really hard if you're too close to the situation, if you have low rapport or trust or credibility. Honestly, the best thing you can do is build up that relationship before you can have that conversation. I know that's disappointing and will take years in some cases, but again, I'm just presenting the research. You can ask for a break or disengage, or like the examples Maven gave earlier, like I would absolutely say, like, there are some things way more important, like your personal safety and the way you're treated, than an intellectual conversation. So have healthy boundaries, practice self-care. One of the things I do is I pause and say, wait a second, do we have the same goal in this conversation? Like, what do you want out of this? Because I want this. And if it's not the same, then we're going to part ways. That has been a huge game-changing tactic. Okay, then we'll go into a last clip from David McCraney on more about the solutions and the mindset we should have.
All of that gets assuaged by addressing it directly, building rapport in the conversation early, generating this sense of trust with the other person. You're trying to create an environment that's like, if you go watch a movie with one of your friends and you're pretty sure you love it, and you get out and you can't wait to talk to them about it, and they say, I hate that movie, and you don't think, well, we can never talk to each other ever again, or I don't trust you anymore. What you end up doing is getting into one of these like shoulder to shoulder conversations where you're like, well, tell me what you didn't like about it, I'll tell you what I did like about it, and you kind of move each other a little bit. That can only happen in an environment of trust and safety. And you're totally right. Like the fact that you can watch on and be an argument taking place between two people, you don't have any of these pushback feelings. And there's even something called narrative transport in the literature, where this is why a lot of movies and books are so successful at generating change in the culture, because you are an onlooker and there's no urge to create counter arguments while you're watching the thing. You just let it happen passively, and you can allow the arguments to sit out there, and you can take something from it that if you were being told this, if you were being pushed in some way, you would push back, and the other person would push back harder, and you get into a loop of pushing, and you leave the opportunity to learn anything from each other.
Well,
I almost was thinking of the movie that came out where they were choosing a new pope. What was the name of that movie?
Oh,
Starts with a C.
Yeah,
It's when they get together to choose. It's called a congregation. It's called a conclave.
yeah. Okay.
So like that movie, it just seems like it's behind the scenes stuff, right? And everybody could just watch the movie and just take it in. And all of a sudden, like, well, what if a pope maybe could have been sort of a woman that has multiple organs that you don't really know
Spoiler
what
alert.
sex, right? And it just sits there, like he's saying, like you're going to the movie, you're just watching a movie, and all of a sudden, some interesting fact that you never really considered before, all of a sudden can sit with you.
Yep, but when you give direct reasons, like he says, like that just gives them a reason to give counter reasons. So you're literally employing their brain against you when you give direct reasons. Like, I don't know if that's clear.
I think that's where sometimes I feel that in the podcast sphere or even in social media, like you're saying, that it's a place where it has a low chance of working. When people are viewers, so it has a low chance of working with the person you're engaging with. But in all of these spaces, there is an audience, whether it's in the comments of something or audiences to the podcast. And so I do know that I've had my mind changed by seeing people interacting, by being a viewer who doesn't have to engage or have to defend my position, but yet seeing somebody who I do know has my position be kind of thoroughly trounced by the other person. That has kind of like shifted me a little bit. And because I'm a viewer and I wasn't the one there defending myself, I think part of why it was easy to shift a little bit is because I could shift at least a little bit in a way to feel like I wasn't actually shifting at all, if that makes sense. So the conversation starts, I feel like I'm on this person's side, but by the end, I'm shifted a little bit, but I see myself as maybe better or more nuanced than the person who didn't really represent my side the best. Does that make sense? So
yeah.
Anyway,
my only response to that is can you do both? Like my example with the book banning conversation. Like I could show them that clearly there's bans purely on ideological lines. Like, here's the evidence, but I didn't do that. I was like, well, if this evidence existed, would you be interested?
Yeah. And I do think that's probably the best way for the viewer to have a chance still of maybe like going along with it.
And the viewer views that and is like, wow, this guy is super reasonable and patient and really cares about the issue, doesn't want to attack the person. I mean, there's so many things that a neutral observer can, even in the case where you're doing it the normal way and you can be like, well, they're making better arguments, I'm convinced slowly that this side is right. I would argue that can still happen probably even more effectively if you apply these things.
And social media doesn't work very well, and it works even less when you use all caps.
Right.
Yep, totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we get to the how, and wow, this always takes so long because this is always so hard. But we still haven't gotten to what David McRaney has said. These are the 3 best ways. So we got a little bit more.
Okay.
So again, step 0 is ask yourself, why is it important for me to change that person's mind? Is that really the best goal? Like in the Mormonish podcast, like if it's your grandma, she's old. Like, is it really that important to have her change her mind on this? Like, or is other things about the relationship more important? Like, you really have to count the cost. Your goal should be modest, build rapport, compare 2 positions. That's a really good tactic that I use sometimes is I don't want to convince. I'd be like, well, that's a strong argument, but don't you think this and this evidence makes this argument stronger? Like, I'm not saying one is right or the other. I'm just comparing. This is strong, but if this were true, would this be, in your mind, stronger? It's another way, like the movie analogy, to put distance between the argument and them taking it personally, if that makes sense. And have the goal be that the person reflects on their own reasoning. That's really the number 1 goal that David McRaney says with all these things that we're going to present, the 3 best ways to convince people, is they don't have the goal to convince people. Their only goal is optimizing people's self-reflection on their own reasoning. Help people unpack their life experiences. In the Mormonish podcast, we talked a lot about how stories are the ways to open people's minds and to minimize reactance. So just keep it about like, hey, let me tell you a story. People lower their walls when you say those words. Make the bulk of the conversation about the shaping of their opinions. So like, you came to believe this because, that's street epistemology 101. And then hold our own positions very tentatively. Be like, well, all that I've come to now has pointed to this, but I hadn't heard this. I'm now going to consider that. That goes back into the modeling and convincing them that you're just as open to having your mind changed. So yeah, know that human nature is like, if you're emphatic, if you're direct, most likely you're just going to cause an equal counter reaction, and they're going to use their brain not to consider their process. They're going to use their brain to generate reasons why you're wrong. And that's not where you want their brain at. Your whole goal is to keep their brain in the most likely position to consider new information and to self-reflect. That's your real goal, in my opinion. And then shift from the debate mindset to the compare-learn mindset, and talk about things that you have in common and make people feel seen and heard. All right, so how do we do this? This is hard, but this is true.
How do we manage that? Because people fall in love with an idea. A great example I like to use, Mother Teresa. You go to somebody and you're like, well, Mother Teresa was actually not a good person and did a tremendous amount of harm and was an extremely troubled person at the very least. We don't think she was a saint. And people who know nothing about Mother Teresa, except she was a nun born in Calcutta, she's Catholic, that's all they know. They know nothing specific about her except they fell in love with the idea that she was a saintly old woman. They'll just flip out. I mean, they're not interested in discussion. The defense modes kick in and they are saying, they actually attack the messenger. Who would ever say anything untoward about Mother Teresa? So how do we manage that? Because emotion so often, us falling in love with ideas, we're all guilty. How do we get around that?
Well, that is a great example of generating reactance. If you were to approach a person who loves Mother Teresa and you're thinking, I would like them to not love Mother Teresa, the first thing I would ask is, why do you want to do that? Like, what is your motivation? Let's start with let's have a step zero in any stepwise process. What is it that you're hoping to do here? What is driving your desire to engage in that dynamic? And let's get as honest with yourself as possible about it. Are you trying to reduce some sort of harm? Are you interested in that person having very accurate beliefs? Is this something about you want the world to be all fact-based or do you have something against religion? What is your personal motivation here? Get very honest with yourself first, and then approach the other person with that same sort of curiosity. What is motivating their desire to hold that position? What is driving that attitude they currently hold? It probably has very little to do with facts about Mother Teresa. Most likely they had an attitude, a value, a social structure that all generated the motivation to look at all the evidence available in the world and cherry pick it for things that paint Mother Teresa in a positive light.
Thoughts?
This was a great example. I thought, because it's how I feel about Mother Teresa. Like I went through the whole, seeing her as a really great person, very, compassionate for the poor and the sick, especially. And then when you find out the facts behind the scenes, it's quite disturbing. And so I know, partly because she's so ubiquitous in the whether on one side or the other, and that her start really, her name became famous initially on this positive view of her, the saint. I think that's still where a lot of people are. So I guess in one conversation, it might just be a distraction to whatever the overall thing is, whatever it is, and why ever someone brought up Mother Teresa. Maybe it's just a phrase like, I'm no Mother Teresa, but blah, blah, blah. It might be best in that moment to just let that fall and keep going with where the actual conversation was going. I just know, like, that in my mind, me personally, the reason why I would want to correct something like that is that I do feel there's harm in idolizing people who were cruel and diminishing or continuing to hide or pretend as if that cruelty wasn't there, and that that they were a good person when they weren't. But again, it's maybe in the moment not the most important thing to focus on.
Yeah, if I were to interact, like I don't have a huge dog in the fight over Mother Teresa, but just again, he says like there are good reasons why people love Mother Teresa, and even if they know nothing about Mother Teresa, like they have some value that is shoehorned into that they do feel strongly about, and we have to understand that Chesterton fence of why it was put up. But let's say that is the scenario, and I have some really compelling, reason to engage on this, even though, in all honesty, I don't. I would probably say something like what Maven said, like, well, I don't think it's really healthy for society as a whole to hero worship, and maybe there's more to the story of Mother Teresa than we know, and I would just leave it at that.
Yeah.
I would not say, well, you should know that she was bad.
Right.
Somebody might also say, oh, the church does so much good. Do you push back on that and say, well, maybe?
Yep.
No, I honestly, I'm at the point where I would validate. I'm like, yeah, I can point to lots of good the church does. My own mission, got me from being completely introverted, socially anxious to being extremely comfortable with being extroverted. I will owe the church for that my whole life. But logically, that doesn't make up for all the other things they do. So I will probably say, like, yeah, they do a lot of good. But in my mind, I'll be like, but that's not the whole story. Yeah. Like Hitler made the trains run on time. Right. Like, is Hitler good? Like, come on.
Because then right after that, they say, so why do you want to destroy the church, Maven?
That's a good point. And honestly, I'm at the point where I think immediate instinct is to push back on the church doing good at all. Or at least not in the way that members think, and the way that I know that I used to think that it did a lot of good, and then it turns out it doesn't, and a lot of times that same ignorance is displayed. But that's a really good example, Kendall, is is it worth validating or criticizing in the moment, or either taking the track like I would maybe want to, which is like, what good exactly, and then when they come with things like how much they give to the poor, to point out it's really all not that much, or all these other things like missionary work, it's just like that's still funded mainly by members and they're paying for it themselves, so it's when they say the rainy day fund is for that, or the billions in investments, that's the one it gets me when they're like, well, but the missionary fund, and it's like, well, during COVID, they actually increased the amount that people had to pay, to do that. But sometimes maybe it's better to just to do your thing, Kendall, and say like, that's true. I will agree with you. I'll give that to you. I will agree, but take it further. But let's also talk about the harm.
The example I gave was bad because the but in my mind is according to the research. Again, I don't like that human nature is this way, but I've been in this circumstance many times, and it is my belief. I know you're not going to like this. Our audience is not going to like this. I don't like this. But what is actually the best thing, especially if they already know your position, especially if they're friends or family, honestly, the best thing is to validate the most you can. I have been in this position and I have said, yes, the church does a lot of good. In fact, did you know that they came out recently with an emotional intelligence course that you can take as part of Sunday school? I praise the church for that act. Like, how much good will that do in the world? Good for the church for that. And that's all I'll say. I'll just validate that the church does a lot of good. Knowing human nature, that like that interaction when they know my position is, wow, Kendall sees what I see. He's safer than I thought he was. Over the long term, I'm convinced this is the best tactic. They're not going to be open to the SEC information, to the charitable, to the COVID. They're closed-minded. It's just a fact of human nature. The best thing I can do is to get them to see me as someone they can be themselves around, someone who is safe, someone who can see what they see. Then is the best chance that we'll maybe have that conversation later, or they might be open to something I have to say later. Because if I go against the church in the moment, what I'm really doing mechanically is ensuring that their defenses and walls will stay high.
There's a good point that you just brought up, is maybe part of the difference in knowing when to use these tactics or not is the relationship with the person that you're talking to.
Very much so. Yes.
Yeah. If it's family, if you need to maintain it and you have a desire to kind of work through and have these relationships, like we're not talking about setting boundaries where they're hurting you or harming you with their beliefs or their actions. When there's not harm in it for you, this is the best way. And I would agree with that 100% for people in your life that either you want to be there or have to be there. Maybe it's an employer or something like that, where you just kind of got to make things work and not cause too much ruckus. Yeah.
But if I have a history of saying all these validating things, and then like, I don't know, one day we're on vacation and we're like waiting for 2 hours in line somewhere, they might ask, hey, one time you said this, like, tell me more.
Yeah.
It's all worth it. It's all worth it for that one moment. Really, truly. I know it's hard. I know it's excruciatingly slow and not fair, but I'm here to tell you, if you want to influence people, this is the way.
All right.
Okay.
Do we have, is this a place we can wrap it up now? We've already at over 2 hours, which I know is a lot of it is my fault. Or is there more to wrap up in the slides?
There is more, but like, in my opinion, like I've encapsulated the 3 methods that he goes over in kind of a more like colloquial way. So
okay, they kind of threw out.
Yeah. And really, I kind of, it pains me to go over the actual methods. Like, here they are.
Okay.
And like,
let's bring them, get them up.
Yeah, they're really hard. Like, it's really involved. You have to kind of practice and get some training. And these are the best ways. I think my way is simpler because it's about mindset. It's about attitude. You don't have to remember the steps. You don't have to remember about saying the right words. So I kind of like my methods better. But this is what the actual research has been done, like longitudinal studies of like, if you want to change a person's position, this is what you do. Like, you deep canvas, you do street epistemology. Here's that. It's all about rapport. You just keep it about the claim and how they arrive to that claim. Do I have it right? What's your confidence level? Oh, that's such a good tactic, is ask their confidence level. It's, again, another tactic to make it less personal. You're just asking them to say, you know, nine times out of 10, they won't say, oh, I'm 10 out of 10 confident. If they do even 9.8, you can ask the amazingly open-minded question of, that's interesting, 9.8. Why was it not a 10? And let's just pause the conversation. From what I've shared, why is that one of the best questions you can ask? Why is it not a 10?
Because you're getting them to talk about what reduced their confidence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You are employing their brain to do your work for you. You are using their brain to be like, well, here's the weaknesses of my own position. I'm thinking about the opposite side. I'm contemplating. I'm using my brain. I'm being reasonable. Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I love it.
So if they say 10, you could say, well, how come you didn't say 11?
No, if they say 10, be like it says, like, how did you arrive at that level of confidence? I mean, I don't know. Yeah. Maybe your question could result in some things, but that's not what the presenter of the.
I know. I was just teasing.
Yeah. But on the flip side, you can ask what's something that would maybe drop their confidence a little bit. So you're not asking what would completely change your mind, but what would make you just a little bit less sure about this, and they'll go there sometimes because you're not asking them to go all the way.
Yeah, that's actually in step 7, and I've done the full training on street epistemology. In fact, I have the website somewhere I wanted to give people. Streetepistemology.org will get you there, but it's something else like navigating something, and that's where the street epistemology course is. And if you do the full course in step 7, they do say sometimes you can say, if this were introduced, would that lower your confidence? Or, you know, if this were true, how would that affect your confidence? Like, you can go there, but I'm here to tell you, like, that's kind of a risky thing. You kind of got to use that sparingly and judge the situation because of the high likelihood of generating reactance. but that is within the system to introduce that kind of conversation. I love those conversations.
And we can find that whatever that address is for the course that I think it's the one that Anthony Magnabosco has been working on. We'll have that in the comments.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
And then the last method is just what David McGraney says: have a change conversation, and it's the same type of thing. Actually, I was confusing it. So Anthony Magnabosco does in his step 7 allow for this, but this method is all about competence levels and what would affect their competence level. But anyway, and then my last slide is just my first slide again. Remember, people have good reasons for believing what they believe. You can't copy paste your reason. It comes down to subjectivity, their reasons. Like, you can't say you should value this more. People value what they value. The best chance you have is maintaining rapport, safety, and respect. Remember, we're not rational creatures. We're rationalizing creatures. And we overwhelmingly have a feeling first and then use reasons to justify the feeling. We very, very few of us start with facts and have a position based purely off of facts. It's just not the way we operate. Everyone's the hero in their own story. The more you fight against them, the more you invite them to entrench. And then the extent to which you can't validate, empathize, and build shared safe spaces, the extent to which you are the irrational one in the conversation. You have to understand human nature and what triggers do to your brain, and allowing differences in that state. Okay, and that's my presentation.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Ways to contact you. So if people aren't seeing the screen right now, Kendall's contact info is right there. So great.
Okay,
Right.
Thanks so much. I think a lot of people, like you said, Maven, need to know about this, not to use it all the time, but to have it as an available tool.
Yeah.
I first met Kendall at the Good Book Club, and I thought, what an arrogant, pompous. No, I'm just kidding.
No.
I thought, what a good guy. You know, he's sharing this information. He was very clear in the presentation, and I really appreciated having him show up at the Good Book Club and do that book that you did. And I've been wanting to do a show with Kendall for a long time since, and because to me, Kendall seems to have recently been on almost every chat everywhere I went. It was like, oh yeah, Kendall, we should do a show with him. And so thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, happy to be on. I sent you more ideas. I kind of want to separate my channel, which is general self-improvement, from my Exmo stuff. So if you can be my outlet for all my Exmo stuff, that'd be great. I'll be on anytime.
That's quite clever. Yeah.
That's right. Our audience could also use general self-improvement.
Yeah, that's what my channel is all about. Like the
so when we talk about your
ideas
channel,
that will change your life. Yeah.
We'll get to all that. And I think the lesson for the day is everybody remember that when Maven was in high school, she was homophobic, but it was because God wanted her to be. That's what the lesson is.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
But she was able to overcome.
Affirmed that as a safe belief.
Yeah.
She was able to overcome that, and I'm very proud of her for that, even though it took the teacher to lash out at her.
It took a lot. There are many steps and many years along the way, but that
was like a stepping point, the first
step. That was
step.
a big one. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
All right. Thanks again for everybody watching. Like and subscribe, and have a great rest of 2025. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Thanks.